Okay, we're going to, I think, John, it's your turn to introduce this.
So now our opening devotions. I hope you all can see the slide. Our world has changed. In silence, look at Mary Fleeson's painting, Tree of Life. What do you see? What do you feel? What is God saying to you? In the midst of deaths, there is life. Life drawn from the living water and anchored in the Spirit, spreading branches o'er the whole of creation to revitalize and renew. Manifest in grain and vine, in sorrow and in joy, to fall and rise on celestial wings, no longer earthbound, with wounded limbs both glorious and sublime. Let us pray. God of ongoing creation, bringing life into our world, sweeping away the old and ringing in the new. Through the power of your Spirit, open our hearts and minds to the possibilities of this moment. Help us to be imaginative, innovative, and creative as we examine our response to the challenges of COVID-19. Help us to be honest, open, and true as we explore the complexities of our individual and collective feelings of grief at this time. Help us to find sources of encouragement, optimism, and resilience as we emerge into a new era where old certainties have vanished. You are our God of resurrection. Breathe your resurrection spirit into our lives. Amen. We're going to listen to two women, Lindsey and Alison, as they discuss coping with grief during lockdown.
Many of you will probably have heard of the grief theory of the 5 stages of loss, which were written down by a Swiss doctor in the late 1960s. She extensively worked with the dying and worked out that people in the process of dying are those who know that they're dying, or dying of a terminal disease, work through certain stages to come to terms with that diagnosis. And I find examples where we look at the pandemic and where that might be mirrored. And I know that the 5 stages of grief have been, and Kübler-Ross has been criticized for thinking in too linear terms, and thinking of has been challenged, that the way she portrays those stages, it gives the impression that you work through them one after the other, And then once you've worked through all of them, you're done, you're fine, you're okay. And when actually the reality of grief and bereavement is that you come back to some of them, you may not go through all of them, you may jump from one to the other within a very short period of time, and you can be, you know, thrown back into depression or anger or whatever years down the line from when the loss occurred. But I still think it's very useful to think about the different emotions attached to grieving, and particularly so now more with the look at how has the virus, the COVID-19 virus or the pandemic affected us collectively. So when we talk of shock or denial, then there may have been sentences like these: the virus won't affect us, it's just in China, it won't come here, we're okay, we can still meet in church for prayer, nothing has ever stopped us. I'm still going out, nobody can tell me what I can and can't do. While I'm fit and young, why should I be careful? What's going to happen to me? And some of those questions, you know, have been there all along by different groups of people. Some were particularly dominant at the beginning, well, in the middle of March, when we started to realize that it wasn't just a problem in China. Then there may be feelings of anger. You making me stay at home. You know, the baptism that we'd planned for this Sunday can't happen. You taking away my activities, my job, my income, all those insecurities that people are suddenly facing. No planning security. I can't celebrate my birthday, or the wedding had to be pared down to, first of all, it had to be postponed, and then it had to be pared down to only 10 guests, and then the feeling is really unfair that we can't have Granddad's funeral in church, or that we can't have all gather as a church community to say goodbye to that very dear member of our community. In the bargaining stage, maybe things like this have gone through your mind, or you've heard other people say, so okay, if I social distance all the time and self-isolate for 2 weeks, everything will be better, okay? If I do that little bit, then the whole world will change. If I do all the shopping for my elderly parents so that they don't need to leave the house, they won't die. And then the fourth stage that Elisabeth Kübler-Ross called sadness, depression, or testing. When it was like, I don't know when this will end. I can't cope, this is all too much. When will I ever sing in a choir again? I'm lonely, I really miss my friends and family. And maybe we've all hit that wall at some point over the last 5 months, depending on our circumstances. And the final stage that Elisabeth Kübler-Ross talks about is the stage of acceptance. This is happening. I have to figure out how to behave, what I feel able to do. I can wash my hands, I can carry hand sanitizer with me, I can keep a safe distance, I can learn how to work virtually, how to do a webinar, I can wear a mask. Yes, it's uncomfortable and hot, but I can get used to it. So a sense of we learning to adapt, we finding ways to live with COVID-19 and to move forward.
Sometimes the language used by psychiatrists about bereavement, grief and mourning, it can feel a little bit cold, a little bit technical, devoid of feeling. There are powerful emotions at play, whether we are mourning the death of a partner, parent or child, the loss of a job or business, or the loss of the certainties of our daily routine, social contact, collective worship, and Christian fellowship. Nikki Gerard, in her book, What Dementia Teaches Us About Love, articulates these deep feelings in a set of quotes from people who've been through bereavement. As you listen to these, what feelings stand out for you? I have a friend whose partner died when he was still young, and their child was only 4 years old. She says that for many months she was quite mad with grief, and she means it literally. She lost her mind over it.
Another talks about how grief hurts, physically hurts, in the stomach, in the heart, in the head, in the bones and in the blood. It grubs us, punches at us, takes our breath away, assaults us and wrings us out.
Or another who speaks of how old she felt for a while, stooped over and slow and befuddled with loss.
Or garrulous, stopping everyone to say over and over again what they have lost, on a loop of time, in perpetual lament.
Or lost, wild, abandoned, scattered, the mind like a drawer of knives.
Useless, listless, drab, tired, ill with loss.
Strange, unfamiliar. Sorrow covers the world like snow does a landscape, making everything that was known strange.
Time passes, a calendar of pain, but death is not just a mark on a headstone. Love is not in the past tense. And so the description by Nikki Jara is a really good description of the physicality of how personal that encounter with our personal grief can be. And I just want to mention two other important theories of grief without going into detail. You may have heard of them. They will also be on the bibliography list if you want to find out more about it. They have been developed on from Elisabeth Kübler-Ross's theory, and William Worden talks of 4 tasks of loss or mourning that you have to encounter and work through. And then there's the dual process model of grief by Henk Schutt and Margaret Strube. And really it is about realizing that those emotions and feelings that we go through in a bereavement process don't follow in a certain linear process, but you may oscillate from one feeling to the other within minutes. And you can be in a situation where you think, oh, I can cope with this. And then you hear a hymn or some music playing and the tears just start flowing because it hits you out of nowhere where you didn't expect it. Or you think you're ready to sort out the flat and give things away, and suddenly you come across some photographs that remind you of a really nice holiday, or of a conversation you've had, and you hit rock bottom again. So it's just being aware that these theories also make us aware that it's not a linear process. So therefore, it's better to speak of a cycle of grief, recognizing that the feelings may be reoccurring in different intensity and triggered by different things. Sometimes it's some people speak of a cycle or of a spiral of grief, where you have the same emotions, but you revisit them in a different stage, when your mind and when your body and when your subconscious is ready to deal with it, then you get another tranche of it. And most of the emotions associated with a bereavement or a significant loss, that can be anything from losing somebody to death, or losing your job, or losing dreams, losing a future, they all come into play as on our journey of grief. And I want to introduce you to the concept of the waterfall of grief. Those of you who've done the bereavement course at Cliff will be familiar with it, but I found it a really helpful way of explaining how this grief journey might be working. So I believe you can all see this whiteboard, and we sometimes talk of our lives as a river, which kind of flows like this, and you can imagine yourself in a little boat going along this river of your life, and then you hit a significant loss, somebody dies, something terrible happens to you, and it feels like the safety of this river is taken away from you, and you just fall down this massive waterfall and find yourself thrown around at the bottom of this waterfall from one side to the other. The waves are tossing. You might land here on the rocks and feel the pain physically of what's happening to you. The waves might drown you again and again, and you're fighting to get your breath and find your feet, but you swept around in this lake at the bottom of the waterfall, or you swept into this area here and feel completely on a limb, not able to reach anybody who might be on the other side of the lake looking out for you, not being able to communicate what you want to say to them, not feeling understood by them. And this is also, I think, the place where you feel completely overwhelmed. I think Ziggy said it earlier, you've got this intense feeling of hurt, and then have to deal with all the admin and everything else, and it's really like having a wave washing over your head again and again and again, when you're just coming up, maybe managing to breathe, maybe managing to sleep for a couple of hours, but not getting the rest that you need. And then eventually you swept into this new arm of the river, which continues here. And this is what we call, you find your new normal. You find new ways of doing things. You find ways of adapting to your new life. And there may be another smaller waterfall as something is triggered. And then your life continues somehow. And the important thing, I think, is that with this picture of the river of life, that these two river arms are connected. Everything that you've gone through is part of that river that you call your life. Everything, how you build your new life out of this chaos and disorientation, is still connected to the life you had before you fell down the waterfall. And it's really important. There's another theory that talks of continuing bonds, that there is a connection, and like we had in that poem at the beginning, that love continues, that there's a connection between this life we had here on this river arm and the life we have now as something new. And maybe you want to draw your own waterfall of grief. Maybe you want to explore that for yourself and find out who the people were that helped you, or what was instrumental for you to find your way into this new waterfall. So you see all those emotions that we talked about already repeated: the shock and the numbness, the denial, the loss and disorientation, physical symptoms of the pain, being disorganized or washed up, breaking down, and then moving into mourning and acceptance of the reality and reorganizing, reorientating ourselves. We're going to go into breakout groups for 10 minutes now. I think Catherine will put you into groups, and have it with that picture of the waterfall in mind, or everything you've heard so far. What can you see, or what have you been observing in terms of collective experience of grief due to the pandemic? We talked a lot about the personal experience of grief. I'd like to invite you to bring it on a more collective level now. What have you seen, or what do you think, and some of you have already flagged up what might be the issues in our churches, but what are we seeing in terms of collective experience of grief due to COVID-19?
Our new Methodist president, Richard Teal, in his address to conference, drew on a theologian Walter Brueggemann's mapping of the Psalms against the human life cycle. So we have periods of orientation where life's stable and everything's going well. We know who we are and what we need to do. And then there are periods of disorientation, and that feeling of orientation swept away and old certainties disappear. And we feel lost and uncertain. And then after disorientation comes new orientation, where we find our feet again. Richard uses the word reorientation, but I prefer the words new orientation, because to me, reorientation suggests going back to old certainties, whereas new orientation is about finding who we are after the trials of disorientation. We're changed, and like the waterfall of grief, our new orientation is linked to our previous orientation, but shaped by our experience of disorientation. There's absolutely no doubt that COVID-19 is an intense period of disorientation for us, both individually and collectively as a church. But my feeling is we've been in a state of disorientation since well before COVID-19. But the intensity of what we're experiencing now is actually bringing home to us the reality of the situation. Richard spoke about his hopes for the new normal post-COVID-19, a renewed emphasis on the faithfulness of God, and a greater reliance on the cross, resurrection, and power of the Holy Spirit. But we're still in the midst of disorientation. There isn't a new normal yet. So how can we shape our worship and our prayer lives in a way which allows us to process our grief? Already said, a lot of people are just in denial. Is there anything that we can do to help us work through all the other parts of grief? Brueggemann points to the Psalms of lament as a necessary response to this disorientation. He's critical of the way we've allowed lament to be sidelined in our worship. We praise and we thank, but we don't complain. Perhaps we see negativity as a failure of faith, when in fact there's a dishonesty in the way we worship and pray if we don't acknowledge the way the world is, rather than how we would like it to be. So Psalms of lament are a powerful way of articulating how we feel. They give us permission to vent the complex feelings surrounding grief. And they allow us to ask, where are you, God? For a book whose name in Hebrew is Tehillim, which means praises, we might actually be surprised to find that lament is the single largest genre of psalms. And when we look at their content, we might actually better describe them as psalms of complaint rather than lament. They have a structure. Some psalms closely follow, some only loosely. And in that structure, there's a direct address to God, a complaint, a petition. We want you to do something to fix it, God. Some statement of trust concerning God. You know, we trust God to save us. We trust God to vindicate what we're doing. And a vow to offer public thanksgiving after God has intervened favourably. Psalm 13 is a good example of this. If you've got a Bible and you want to turn to it, please do, but don't worry, I'm going to read it out. And it's only 6 lines short, so don't worry about this going on for too long. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me. Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death. And my enemy will say, I have prevailed. My foes will rejoice because I am shaken. But I trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. When we hear that, we hear real, visceral, deeply felt emotion. And we were talking earlier about the physicality of the emotions of grief. And we can almost feel that in the way that this psalm's written. It plays out the stages of grief and gives us a language in which to express our emotions. We see a move to praise of God without knowing if the issues have been resolved. The psalmist is working in his disorientation, but in breaking his silence and speaking, the psalmist is somehow changed. Changed because he knows God has heard. Brueggemann, in his commentary on the psalm, talks about it almost being like Freudian talk therapy, where we can move beyond repressed feelings because we speak them out loud. And maybe there's something in this for us as a church to encourage people to speak out how they're feeling. Otherwise, it's just nice theoretical theology rather than something that's practical. If you're looking at its practicality, it must have had something for the ancient Israelis, because you just look at it, how many psalms of lament there are in the Psalter. And one of the things that Deborah and I found from our experience of the small group work on bereavement and grief that we did, giving people space in which to talk about their feelings of loss and giving them the tools to understand and work through those emotions was really strengthening both individually and also strengthening for the group. And you could feel the group coming together as we talked through each person's feelings of grief of what they'd lost. And they weren't all about losing people. Some were about losing jobs. Go to the next slide, please. As we work towards a new normal, we have to question, what do we do with the wider body of our churches and chapels? One of the things that we certainly found out as we work with our group, it depends on people being honest about the way they feel. But to do that, first of all, you've got to be in a safe space where people are prepared to be honest and open. And when it comes down to expressing feelings, maybe it's a generational thing. I was always taught to hide my emotions. Praise, lots of us were told as kids, and I don't know if anybody else recognises this. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry for. One or two nods there.
Yeah.
And we're also, aren't we good at answering fine when asked, how are you? It's a word I'd like to ban, and similar ones. Tried to ban my teenage boys from saying fine, but they got around that by just grunting these days. And my granddad, he was always middling. Yeah, if he was fit as anything, he was middling. If his leg was hanging off by a thread, he'd still be middling. And as church, aren't we guilty of being middling all the time? I think we have a challenge to find together a language of lament that recognises the realities of life and helps us move through this disorientation. I've got no easy answers to it, and I think I'm looking forward to the next bit of the conversation to see how other people think about what we might do here. But we had a very good practical example of how we might approach lament collectively. In the latest edition of Connection, Michaela Youngson, echoing some words from Psalm 137, has put a wonderful litany in. And we're going to do this now. Join in if you feel like it. I'll read the words in light type, and we'll say together the words in bold. We thought we knew how the world was meant to be. Day followed night. Every week had a Sunday, and that was the day for church. How
can we sing the Lord
of
strange land?
We thought we knew how the world was meant to be. We made our plans, held our meetings, kept the roof on the church and the show on the road. How
can we sing the
Lord's song,
a strange
land?
land? We thought we knew how the world was meant to be. We would see colleagues, friends, and loved ones again, and we would embrace, laugh, and share stories as we always have.
How can we sing the song of a strange land?
Now, we know something new. We know that the world is not ours to control, and that our plans are confounded by the smallest microbe. God
teaches us a new song
for a new land. Slide.
One before.
Yeah. And now we know something new. We know that the church is not committees, agendas, and buildings. It is us in homes, streets, hospitals throughout the world. God is teaching us
a new song
for a new land.
New
And now we know something new. We only have today with those we love. Today is a day to say I love you, to mend an argument, to hold on tight. God
is teaching us
A new song
for a new land. Amen.
Amen.
So I think we're shortening that time you're going to get in the breakout groups, given that it's nearly 9 o'clock. So you only have 5 minutes to think about what is there to lament. And I absolutely take on board what somebody else said, that there will be so many things that we haven't really thought about yet, what there is to lament. But from where we are now, as we look towards maybe opening our churches in the months to come, and what conversations you've had, what is there to lament, and how could we lament, and how could we express it? Okay, any other comments from you? Anything else you want to feedback? I just want to sum it up with this slide. In another excellent book by Sasha Bates, Languages of Loss, again it will be on your bibliography, Sasha talks about the Japanese art of kintsugi, and many of you again may have come across it. It's the art of making a beautiful bowl out of a broken bowl by mending it with glue that is mixed with gold or silver, so that the brokenness is shown and is visible, but that at the same time it's beautified. And I think it's a good image for the grieving process, and also for sort of coming to terms with how we are going to be church in new ways. And David Kessler, who worked closely with Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, has more recently added another phase to another stage to that model of grief, and he calls it the last stage is to find meaning. In other grief theories, therapists or theologian or whoever writes about it, talk about resilience and how to build resilience and become resilient grieving people. And what we understand by that is really that we've had opportunity to live with our grief, to express it, and we may want to borrow biblical language for that, as the Psalms give us such a good example, but also to reconnect and embrace all the brokenness that comes with it. And in kintsugi, in this Japanese art of mending bowls with a gold glue, I think that expresses it very well. That it's still a bowl, it still has the same functions, and some of our core calling, who we are as church, has definitely not changed. It just has changed how we might express that, or how we become, how we live as disciples in times of COVID. But and as Richard Teal said, the faithfulness of God is been the constant throughout, and but we need to rediscover that and find ways of re-expressing that. So I'll leave you with that art of kintsugi and that picture of the broken and mended bowl and beautified broken bowl as a picture for how we might go through this grieving process. I'm sure we'll be making many mistakes along the way, but it's an encouragement to embrace those mistakes and see them as something that makes the whole picture more beautiful than the broken shards on its own. John will lead us in a closing reflection.
We return to the Tree of Life. Look again at Mary Fleeson's painting. In silence, search its depths. Has anything changed in your perception of the images? What is God saying to you?
And so we send you out into this evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your contributions. And sorry that we went a little bit over the time. I hope it's been worthwhile for you. And if there's anything you'd like to connect with us about or feedback to us, then that would be great. And I send you out with this blessing. The blessing of God, our Maker, be ours. Hope and courage and strength and healing all the nights and days of our journey home. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you both. That was really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.